everyone, I'm Laura Paquette, and today I'm breaking down The Lifted Veil by George Eliot, otherwise known as her real name, Mary Ann Evans. And this is a much shorter work, it's only 40 pages, so this is going to be a shorter video, but this novel, or novella, really packs a punch in 40 pages. It starts out, "The time of my end approaches. I have lately been subject to attacks of angina pectoris, and in the ordinary course of things, my physician tells me, I may fairly hope that my life will not be protracted many months." What? So this is a great. It's not just first line, but great two sentences for a couple reasons. One, it immediately gives us a time frame, the time of my end approaches, which, I mean, to be fair, is, I guess, technically true of everyone, but in this case, there's a sense of immediacy. There's also immediate importance. You know, if your life is going to end soon, there's already that stake. There's already this gravitas to it. This matters. But there's also that twist. I may fairly hope that my life will not be protracted many months. That's not something you would normally think if you realize that you're dying. So by having that time frame, that importance, but also that twist at the end, it just compels you to keep reading. Next, there's the setup. So in a lot of Victorian novels or novellas, you're gonna get this character's whole life. This David Copperfield. I started here. Here's everything that ever happened to me. We do get that here, but we get it only after she's established that Latimer, the main character, can read other people's minds, and he can see into the future. And so when she goes back and gives us, I don't want to call it backstory because it's not backstory. It really is setup, and the difference is we need to see everything she shows us. What she shows us is how he first realizes that he can see the future and shows us, okay, he's not crazy, he's not making it up. This isn't just an unreliable narrator, although he is an unreliable narrator, but this is actually happening. And we see his process and how he figures that out, but then we also see how he meets his wife. We see that it's going to end in disaster, and we see that he keeps courting her anyway, and he just really can't help himself. And that's something you don't really want to normally say, because in real life, you can help yourself, but he can see the future. He knows this is my wife, and she's going to hate me and possibly kill me. So let's just keep trucking along. Next, in this novel, this is something Eliot is kind of famous for more generally, whether you love her or hate her, is voice. So the tone, there's long sentences, there's long paragraphs, but it's very conversational. The way you read it is pretty much the way you talk. It's almost gossipy. There's this sense where he's sharing the secret. He's letting you in on something that not everyone is going to know. So it pulls you in because you're in on the secret. Next, she uses a variety of metaphors. One same incident, I forget what it is. I think it's someone's inner thoughts. But the same thing is described as an ill-played instrument and the loud activity of an imprisoned insect. That's probably also the reason that some people don't like her, is that she tends to go on and on a little bit, even in 40 pages. But by having those two very different metaphors, she's able to give just a full picture of something. And it also just adds a sense of humor. This is, obviously tragic, but the guy kind of deserves it. He's a great guy. But that brings us to the next point, which is how she builds out an unreliable narrator. And there are plenty of ways to do this, but at least in this work, the narrator doesn't let anyone else talk. So there's very little dialogue. Everything we're seeing, probably out of these 40-some pages, probably 37 of it is just his own head. So you have to take his word for it. You don't get anyone else's view. So obviously already it's skewed. Next, you see that he hides details until they fit the narrative. There's a couple of times where he's just going along, and then he'll say, wait a minute, I forgot to tell you this. And it's, okay, did you forget this, or are you just creating your own narrative here? Which, I mean, literally she is. That's how books work. But you can see how you're being manipulated into thinking this character has such and such motives because you only see them in one context and you only see them how they affect Latimer and how he wants you to view them. Next is the compression and expansion of time. There are entire decades where he describes Latimer, condenses to a sentence or two. And then there are single instances that are drawn out for a paragraph. And obviously, this is going to greatly affect how you view something. And then lastly, the main thing I'm going to look at is something I talked a little bit about during Upon a Burning Throne, and this idea of how do you show someone who is unlikable or wrong, evil, but still make them interesting or readable. This guy Latimer, because he's an unreliable narrator and because he's really the only one speaking, you can kind of gloss over what he's doing, but the way he speaks about people, the way he reads their thoughts, he's very unsympathetic to anyone but himself, very self-centered, very selfish, never treats anyone well, and the way he talks about his wife, I mean, to be fair, she does try to kill him, which puts a damper on things, but we never see why. Is it really she's just a shallow, terrible person, or is he, I mean, I don't know, I can't think of something that would justify poisoning the guy, but you can see the way he treats people, he is off. There's something wrong with him. So how is he still readable? One, the scenario was just interesting. You want to see it play out. You want to see how this train wreck happens. It's also that he is more than what he seems. So everyone else, he's kind of this sickly poet type, so everyone just thinks, oh, poor Latimer, he's this weak guy. And so he looks like an underdog. He's just someone who, his brother totally ignores him when he just takes long walks with his fiancée. Because, oh yeah, Latimer, he's not a threat to anyone. And so we see that Latimer is a lot more than he seems. And at least for me, it makes you, that contrast between appearances and reality is interesting enough to make you want to read about them. There's also the sense of fate. Obviously, if you can see the future, there's this relinquishing of responsibility. If you can't change things, I mean, what then? How can your actions be judged? Next, there are warring desires. So it's not often that we see Latimer try to do something good or try to do something responsible. Really, the only case is with his wife, with the woman who becomes his wife, Bertha. He knows that this is not going to go well, but yet he's still drawn towards her because she's the only person whose mind he can't read. He has this warring desire, so we understand where he's coming from, and there's this shrinking hope, really, very, very small to begin with, because, you know, how the first line begins, but there's this shrinking hope that, you know, he's not going to live, but maybe he'll live as a decent person in the meantime. Next, there's kind of this on-screen versus off-screen type thing. Really, in writing, it's going to be scenes versus narration. So when you write out a scene and you say exactly what happens, it feels more real. It's showing. Whereas if you just kind of summarize it, then it's easy to gloss over. So when Latimer is treating people poorly and all that, it's never laid out. It's never in a scene where we see Latimer is a jerk to the servants. It's just kind of the way he talks about people, the way he dismisses people. We can see he has no sympathy for anyone else. But if you're just reading and you're kind of glossing over, you're not going to notice. Especially because he is an unreliable narrator. He's not taking anyone else seriously. It just kind of glosses over the surface. And I think, lastly, the one thing that makes him kind of a sympathetic character, even though he's obviously not a great guy, is that he's never wanting, he's never needlessly cruel. He's never, well, okay, that's not true. He's never crazy. So the things he does are petty. They're mean and just jerky. But he never does anything that's over the top or cartoonish. It's something that in a bad moment anyone could do. So even though throughout this whole scene or this whole novella, we never see him do anything decent. We're not aware of him ever being, kind or sympathetic to anyone. But the only times he's cruel, for lack of a better word, it's very small. It's like a normal. I don't want to say umbrage type way because she's over the top, but it's someone having a bad day rather than like let's call the cops. This is something that anyone could fall into, and it's kind of cathartic. Like you want to be better than this, but at the same time, you know that on your bad days, you're probably like this. So, that's all I got for this. For The Lifted Veil by George Eliot. It's a short read. You can read it probably in an hour, but packs a punch. Highly recommend. If you like this, hit like and subscribe.